Section 13 of American Big Game Hunting, a collection of stories by the Boone and Crockett Club. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. American Big Game Hunting, Section 13, In Buffalo Days by George Bird Grinnell, Part 3. During the last days of the buffalo, a remarkable change took place in its form, and this change is worthy of consideration by naturalists, for it is an example of specialization, of development in one particular direction, which was due to a change in the environment of the species, and is interesting because it was brought about in a very few years, and indicates how rapidly, under favoring conditions, such specialization may sometimes take place. This change was noticed and commented on by hunters who followed the northern buffalo, as well as by those who assisted in the extermination of the southern herd. The southern hunters, however, averred that the regular buffalo had disappeared, gone off somewhere, and that their place had been taken by what they called the southern buffalo, a race said to have come up from Mexico, and characterized by longer legs and a longer, lighter body than the buffalo of earlier years, and which was also peculiar in that the animals never became fat. Intelligent hunters of the northern herd, however, recognized the true state of the case, which was that the buffalo, during the last years of their existence, were so constantly pursued and driven from place to place that they never had time to lay on fat as in earlier years, and that, as a consequence of this continual running, the animal's form changed, and instead of a fat, short-backed, short-legged animal, it became a long-legged, light-bodied beast formed for running. This specialization in the direction of speed at first proceeded very slowly, but at last, as the dangers to which the animals were subjected became more and more pressing, it took place rapidly, and as a consequence the last buffalo killed on the plains were extremely long-legged and rangy, and were very different in appearance, as they were in their habits, from the animals of 20 years ago. Buffalo running was not a sport that required much skill, yet it was not without its dangers. Occasionally a man was killed by a buffalo, but deaths from falls and from bursting guns were more common. Many curious stories of such accidents are told by the few surviving old-timers whose memory goes back 50 years, to the time when flint-lock guns were in use. A mere fall from a horse is lightly regarded by the practiced rider. The danger to be feared is that in such a fall the horse may roll on the man and crush him. Even more serious accidents occurred when a man fell upon some part of his equipment which was driven through his body. Hunters have fallen in such a way that their whipstocks, arrows, bows, and even guns have been driven through their bodies. The old flintlock guns, or fuchs, which were loaded on the run, with powder poured in from the horn by guests and a ball from the mouth, used frequently to burst, causing the loss of hands, arms, and even lives. While most of the deaths which occurred in the chase resulted from causes other than the resistance of the buffalo, these did occasionally kill a man. A curious accident happened in a camp of Red River half-breeds in the early 70s. The son of an Iroquois half-breed, about 20 years old, went out one day with the rest of the camp to run buffalo. At night he did not return, and the next day all the men went out to search for him. They found the horse and the arms, but could not find the man, and could not imagine what had become of him. About a year later, as the half-breeds were hunting in another part of the country, a cow was seen which had something unusual on her head. They chased and killed her, and found that she had on her head the pelvis of a man, one of the horns having pierced the thin part of the bone, which was wedged on so tightly that they could hardly get it off. Much of the hair on the head, neck, and shoulders of the cow was worn off short, and on the side on which the bone was, down on the neck and shoulders, the hair was short, black, and looked new, as if it had been worn entirely off the skin and was just beginning to grow out again. It is supposed that this bone was part of the missing young man, who had been hooked by the cow and carried about on her head until his body fell to pieces. My old and valued friend Charles Reynolds, for years chief of scouts at Fort Lincoln, Dakota, and who was killed by the Sioux in the Custer fight in 1876, told me of the death of a hunting partner of his, which shows how dangerous even a dying buffalo may be. The two men had started from the railroad to go south and bring in a load of meat. On finding a bunch of buffalo, they shot down by stalking what they required, and then on foot went up to the animals to skin them. One cow, lying on her side, was still moving a little convulsively, but dying. The man approached her as if about to cut her throat, but when he was within a few feet of her head, she sprang to her feet, rushed at him, struck him in the chest with her horns, and then fell dead. Charlie ran up to his partner, and to his horror saw that the cow's horn had ripped him up from the belly to the throat, so that he could see the heart still expanding and contracting. Charlie buried his partner there, and returning to the town, told his story. He was at once arrested on the charge that he had murdered his companion, and was obliged to return to the place and to assist in digging up the body to satisfy the suspicious officials of the truth of his statements. In the early days, when the game was plenty, buffalo running was exhilarating sport. Given a good horse, the only other requisite to success was the ability to remain on his back till the end of the chase. No greater degree of skill was needed than this, and yet the quick motion of the horse, the rough ground to be traversed, and the feeling that there was something ahead that must be overtaken and stopped, made the ride attractive. There was the very slightest spice of danger, for while no one anticipated a serious accident, it was always possible that one's horse might step into a badger hole, in which case his rider would get a fall that would make his bones ache. The most exciting and by far the most interesting hunts in which I ever took part were those with the Indians of the plains. They were conducted almost noiselessly, and no ring of rifle shot broke the stillness of the air, nor puff of smoke rose toward the still gray autumn sky. The consummate grace and skill of the naked Indians, and the speed and quickness of their splendid ponies, were well displayed in such chases as these. More than one instance is recorded where an Indian sent an arrow entirely through the bodies of two buffalo. Sometimes such a hunt was signalized by some feat of daring bravado that, save in the seeing, was scarcely credible, as when the Cheyenne Big Ribs rode his horse close up to the side of a huge bull, and, springing on his back, rode the savage beast for some distance, and then with his knife gave him the death stroke. Or a man might find himself in a position of comical danger, as did the trader, who was thrown from his horse onto the horns of a bull without being injured. One of the horns passed under his belt and supported him, and at the same time prevented the bull from tossing him. In this way he was carried for some distance on the animal's head, when the belt gave way and he fell to the ground unhurt while the bull ran on. There were occasions when buffalo or horses fell in front of a horseman riding at full run, and when a fall was avoided only by leaping one's horse over the fallen animal. In the buffalo chase of old days, it was well for a man to keep his wits about him, for though he might run buffalo 1,000 times without accident, the moment might come when only instant action would save him his life, or at least an ugly hurt. In the early days of the first Pacific Railroad, and before the herds had been driven back from the track, singular hunting parties were sometimes seen on the buffalo range. These hunters were capitalists connected with the newly constructed road, and some of them now for the first time bestrode a horse, while few had ever used firearms. On such a hunt, one well-known railroad director, eager to kill a buffalo, declined to trust himself on horseback, preferring to bounce over the rough prairie in an ambulance driven by an alarmed soldier, who gave less attention to the mules he was guiding than to the loaded and cocked pistol which his excited passenger was brandishing. These were amusing excursions, where a merry party of pleasant officers from a frontier post and their guests, a jolly crowd of merchants, brokers, and railroad men from the East, started out to have a buffalo hunt. With them went the post guide and a scout or two, an escort of soldiers, and the great blue army wagons, under whose white tilts were piled all the comforts that the post could furnish, unlimited food and drink, and many sacks of forage for the animals. Here all was mirth and jest and good fellowship, and except that canvas covered them while they slept, the hunters lived in as much comfort as when at home. The killing of buffalo was to them only an excuse for their jolly outing amid novel scenes. It was on the plains of Montana, in the days when buffalo were still abundant, that I had one of my last buffalo hunts, a hunt with a serious purpose. A company of 50 or more men, who for weeks had been living on bacon and beans, longed for the boss ribs of fat cow, and when we struck the buffalo range, 2 of us were deputed to kill some meat. My companion was an old prairie man of great experience, and I myself was not altogether new to the West, for I had hunted in many territories, and had more than once been jumped by hostile Indians. Our horses were not buffalo runners, yet we felt a certain confidence that if we could find a bunch and get a good start on them, we could bring in the desired meat. The troops would march during the day, for the commanding officer had no notion of waiting in camp merely for fresh meat, and we were to go out, hunt, and overtake the command at their night's camp. The next day, after we had reached the buffalo range, we started out long before the eastern sky was gray, and were soon riding off over the chilly prairie. The trail which the command was to follow ran a little north of east, and we kept to the south and away from it, believing that in this direction we would find the game, and that if we started them they would run north or northwest against the wind, so that we could kill them near the trail. Until some time after the sun had risen, we saw nothing larger than antelope, but at length, from the top of a high hill, we could see, far away to the east, dark dots on the prairie, which we knew could only be buffalo. They were undisturbed, too, for though we watched them for some time, we could detect no motion in their ranks. It took us nearly 2 hours to reach the low, broken buttes on the north side of which the buffalo were, and riding up on the easternmost part of these, we tried to locate our game more exactly. It was important to get as close as possible before starting them, so that our first rush might carry us into the midst of them. Knowing the capabilities of our horses, which were thin from long travel, we felt sure that if the buffalo should take the alarm before we were close to them, we could not overtake the cows and young animals which always run in the van, and should have to content ourselves with the old bulls. On the other hand, if we could dash in among them during the first few hundred yards of the race, we should be able to keep up with and select the fattest animals in the herd. When we reached a point just below the crest of the hill, I stopped and waited while my companion rode on. Just before he got to the top, he too halted, then took off his hat and peered over the ridge, examining so much of the prairie beyond as was now visible to him. His inspection was careful and thorough, and when he had made sure that nothing was in sight, his horse took a step or two forward and then stopped again, and the rider scanned every foot of the country before him. The horse, trained as a real hunter's horse is always trained, understood what was required of him, and with pricked ears examined the prairie beyond with as much interest as did his rider. When the calf of Charlie's right leg pressed the horse's side, 2 or 3 steps more were taken, and then a lifting of the bridle hand caused another halt. At length I saw my companion slowly bend forward over his horse's neck, turn, and ride back to me. He had seen the backs of 2 buffalo lying on the edge of a little flat hardly a quarter of a mile from where we stood. The others of the band must be still nearer to us. By riding along the lowest part of the sag which separated the 2 buttes and then down a little ravine, it seemed probable that we could come within a few yards of the buffalo unobserved. Our preparations did not take long. The saddle cinches were loosened, blankets arranged, saddles put in their proper places and tightly cinched again. Cartridges were brought round to the front and right of the belt, where they would be convenient for reloading. Our coats, tied behind the saddle, were looked to, the strings which held them being tightened and securely retied. All this was not lost on our horses, which understood as well as we did what was coming. We skirted the butte, rode through the low sag and down into the little ravine, which soon grew deeper, so that our heads were below the range of vision of almost anything on the butte. Passing the mouth of the little side ravine, however, there came into full view a huge bull lying well up on the hillside. Luckily his back was toward us, and each bending low over his horse's neck, We rode on, and in a moment were hidden by the side of the ravine. 2 or 3 minutes more, and we came to another side ravine, which was wide and commanded a view of the flat. We stopped before reaching this, and a peep showed that we were within a few yards of 2 old cows, a young heifer, and a yearling, all of them to the north of us. Beyond we could see the backs of others, all lying down. We jumped on our horses again, and setting the spurs well in, galloped up the ravine and up on the flat, and as we came into view, the nearest buffalo, as if propelled by a huge spring, were on their feet, and with a second's pause to look, dashed away to the north. Scattered over the flat were 50 or 75 buffalo, all of which, by the time we had glanced over the field, were off, with heads bending low to the ground and short spiky tails stretched out behind. We were up even with the last of the cows, and our horses were running easily and seemed to have plenty of reserve power. Charlie, who was a little ahead of me, called back, "They will cross the trail about a mile north of here. Kill a couple when we get to it." I nodded, and we went on. The herd raced forward over the rolling hills, and in what seemed a very short time we rushed down a long slope onto a wide flat, in which was a prairie dog town of considerable extent. We were on the very heels of the herd, and in a cloud of dust kicked up by their rapid flight. To see the ground ahead was impossible. We could only trust to our horses and our good luck to save us from falling. Our animals were doing better than we had supposed they could, and were going well and under a pull. I felt that a touch of the spurs and a little riding would bring us up even with the leaders of the buffalo. The pace had already proved too much for several bulls, which had turned off to one side and had been passed by. As we flew across the flat, I saw far off a dark line and 2 white objects, which I knew must be our command. I called to my comrade, and questioning by the sign, pointed at the buffalo. He nodded, and in a moment we had given free rein to our horses and were up among the herd. During the ride I had 2 or 3 times selected my game, but the individuals of the band changed positions so constantly that I could not keep track of them. Now, however, I picked out a fat 2-year-old bull, but as I drew up on him he ran faster than before, and rapidly made his way toward the head of the band. I was resolved that he should not escape, and so, though I was still 15 or 20 yards in the rear, fired. At the shot he fell heels over head directly across a cow which was running by his side and a little behind him. I saw her turn a somersault, and almost at the same instant heard Charlie shoot twice in quick succession, and saw 2 buffalo fall. I fired at a fat young cow that I had pushed my pony up close to. At the shot she whirled, my horse did the same, and she chased me as hard as she could go for 75 yards, while I did some exceedingly vigorous spurring, for she was close behind me all the time. To do my horse justice, I think that he would have run as fast as he could, even without the spurs, for he appreciated the situation. At no time was there any immediate danger that the cow would overtake us. If there had been, I should have dodged her. Presently the cow stopped and stood there very sick. When I rode back, I did not find it easy to get my horse near her, but another shot was not needed, and while I sat looking at her, she fell over dead. The 3 buffalo first killed had fallen within 100 yards of the trail where the wagons afterward passed, and my cow was but little further away. The command soon came up, the soldiers did the butchering, and before long we were on the march again across the parched plain. Of the millions of buffalo which even in our own time ranged the plains in freedom, none now remain. From the prairies which they used to darken, the wild herds, down to the last straggling bull, have disappeared. In the Yellowstone National Park, protected from destruction by United States troops, are the only wild buffalo which exist within the borders of the United States. These are mountain buffalo, and from their habit of living in the thick timber and on the rough mountainsides, they are only now and then seen by visitors to the park. It is impossible to say just how many there are, but from the best information that I can get, based on estimates of reliable and conservative men, I conclude that the number was not less than 400 in the winter of 1891-92. Each winter or spring, a government scout employed in the park sees one or more herds of these buffalo, and as such herds are usually made up in part of young animals and have calves with them, it is fair to assume that they are steadily, if slowly, increasing. The report of a trip made in January 1892 speaks of 4 herds seen in the Hayden Valley, which numbered respectively 78, 50, 110, and 15. Besides these, a number of scattering groups were seen at a distance, which would bring the number up to 300. In the far northwest, in the Peace River district, there may still be found a few wood buffalo. They are seldom killed, and the estimate of their numbers varies from 500 to 1,500. This cannot be other than the merest guess, since they are scattered over many thousand square miles of territory which is without inhabitants and for the most part unexplored. On the Great Plains is still found the buffalo skull, half buried in the soil and crumbling to decay. The deep trails once trodden by the marching hosts are grass-grown now and fast filling up. When these most endured relics of a vanished race shall have passed away, there will be found in all the limitless domain once darkened by their feeding herds not one trace of the American buffalo. End of section 13. End of In Buffalo Days. Read for you by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in February 2016.